The room reeks of rot and betrayal. A king, once feared, now writhes in filth, his insides tearing themselves apart with a violence so grotesque that even his closest men cover their noses and turn away. Sweat and blood drip from his face as his body convulses, every spasm another reminder that power means nothing when death comes for you in its most humiliating form. This is not just a man dying. This is King John of England, the monarch who signed Magna Carta, the tyrant who strangled his own nephew, the ruler whose cruelty bled an entire kingdom, and here, on the stone floor of Newark Castle, his throne has been stolen not by armies, not by rivals, but by his own bowels exploding in a storm of agony. But the real story isn't just about how he died. It's about why. Because history, the kind they teach you in schools, will tell you John was a cruel king who got what he deserved. But what they won't tell you is how his death was more than decay of the flesh, it was a ritual humiliation. A calculated spectacle. The end of his body was also the end of an illusion, one that had kept men in chains for centuries. His fall wasn't an accident. It was the perfect punishment, crafted by forces that move silently, always in the shadows, teaching us one brutal lesson: kings are disposable, power is never truly yours, and every throne sits on borrowed time. Think about it. The most powerful man in England, reduced to begging for mercy as his intestines liquefied from within. Doesn't it feel symbolic? Doesn't it feel orchestrated? Because King John's reign wasn't just about cruelty, it was about control. He used hunger, fear, and torture not to rule, but to test how far men could bend before they broke. And in the end, his death mirrored his reign, grotesque, humiliating, and unforgettable. And yet, behind this horror, there is something darker. Because the truth is, his story wasn't about a single king. It was about the system that allowed him to exist at all. A system older than John, older than England, older than the crown itself. A system that still rules you today, even if you don't see its hand pressing down on your life. Tonight, I will show you how. But first, you must stare into the deathbed of a king and ask yourself, if power could not save him, what chance do you have unless you see the truth? Look beyond the filth-stained sheets of Newark Castle, and you'll see something larger than a king gasping out his last breath. King John wasn't simply a tyrant. He was a prototype. A test subject in the ongoing experiment of power, an experiment that never ended, only evolved. His cruelty was not random madness. It was systemic. A deliberate attempt to discover how much suffering one man could inflict before a people rose up against him, and more importantly, how that uprising could be contained, redirected, and controlled. He taxed his barons until they bled. He squeezed monasteries until their vaults were empty. He ordered children starved in dungeons so their fathers would obey. And when his own nephew, young Arthur of Brittany, became a threat, John personally strangled him, showing his court, his rivals, and perhaps even himself, that no bond of family outweighed the hunger for absolute control. His reign was not leadership, it was psychological warfare. And in that, John succeeded. But here's the truth they never told you: Magna Carta, that great charter of liberty we glorify today, wasn't written for the people. It was a leash placed on John by men who wanted his throne for themselves. It was elites fighting elites, not freedom for the common man. And John? He knew it. That's why he appealed to the Pope. Why he begged Rome to declare the charter void, illegal and unjust. He understood the game better than most. Because even kings bend their knees to higher masters. And here lies the forbidden revelation: John's story proves that crowns are costumes, and kings are pawns. Behind every monarch sits another power, faceless, untouchable, moving pieces on a board older than England itself. The Pope, the barons, the money-lenders, the hidden councils. John wasn't destroyed by dysentery alone. He was crushed by a system that decided his usefulness was over. Think of it like this: a tyrant is never truly free. He believes he commands armies, but in reality, he is commanded by debt, by loyalty bought and sold, by the silent whispers of those who fund his wars. John's violent end was a message, not just to rebels or nobles, but to all future rulers: power is conditional. Step out of line, and your death will be written into history as a grotesque parable. A warning disguised as justice. And you, sitting here centuries later, are still living under that same structure. You may not wear a crown, but the invisible chains John carried are wrapped around your wrists too. You just haven't been forced to see them yet. But you will. Picture the moment, October 1216. A king marches through the marshlands of East Anglia with a baggage train heavy with gold, jewels, and the last remnants of his fortune. This treasure was not merely wealth, it was survival. Without it, John could not pay his mercenaries. Without mercenaries, he had no army. And without an army, his crown was worth less than the mud beneath his boots. Then came the accident, or what history calls an accident. His wagon sank into the rising tide, swallowed by the Washington chests of silver, relics, golden goblets, all gone in minutes, dragged beneath waters that gave nothing back. From that day, John was finished. Stripped of his wealth, his armies dissolved. His allies abandoned him. His throne rotted beneath him. And soon after, his body followed. The historians will tell you it was bad luck, a king undone by misfortune. But you and I know better. Men of power don't fall by chance. They fall when their debts outweigh their worth. John's treasure was not just gold, it was leverage. It was the weight that kept him in the game. And when it sank into the mud, so did his future. Now here is the truth no textbook will whisper: wealth is not money. Wealth is control. Money is the illusion, the tool that passes from hand to hand. But real wealth is what money buys: obedience, armies, silence, survival. John discovered too late that no cruelty could protect him once his gold was gone. His barons didn't hate him enough to fight him when he paid. They hated him enough to betray him when he couldn't. That's the psychology of power. Men don't follow kings. They follow coin. And does it sound so different from your world today? Governments, corporations, entire nations rise and fall not by morality, not by justice, but by liquidity. By who holds the purse strings. John was only a crude version of the system you live in now, where your labor is taxed, your debts bind you, and your survival depends on invisible bankers who will never bleed beside you, but who decide whether you bleed at all. The wash didn't just drown John's treasure. It exposed the truth: without wealth, no man, not even a king, has power. Remember that, because it's still the law of the world you live in. A law older than Magna Carta, older than thrones, older than crowns. When King John's bowels erupted and his body dissolved into fever and filth, it wasn't just death, it was theater. His enemies didn't simply record his end, they celebrated it, crafted it, broadcast it. Chroniclers painted his final moments in lurid detail: a king drowning in excrement, groaning like an animal, abandoned by dignity, abandoned by God. And they spread that image like wildfire. The message was clear: this is what happens to tyrants. This is what happens when you resist the order. But here's the darker truth. His death wasn't just written to entertain. It was written to control. Humiliation is a weapon sharper than the sword. It lingers longer than the noose. A man may fear dying, but he fears disgrace more. John's story was weaponized to remind nobles, rebels, even kings that stepping out of line wouldn't just mean defeat, it would mean mockery for eternity. And ask yourself, isn't that the same weapon they use today? Look at the leaders, celebrities, or thinkers who dare to challenge the system. Rarely are they simply removed. No, they are humiliated. Scandals erupt, secrets are leaked, narratives are twisted until their legacy is not their life's work, but their shame. That's not an accident. That's conditioning. It tells the masses, obey, or your name becomes filth. King John's end became a medieval meme, a psychological scar burned into English memory. A reminder that power is borrowed, never owned. But beneath that humiliation lies something more dangerous, the possibility that John's very death was curated to teach a lesson. Was he poisoned? Was his illness nudged into inevitability? Chroniclers claimed dysentery. But dysentery doesn't always burn so violently, so suddenly, so completely. What if his agony was accelerated? What if his bowels became the stage for an execution dressed as disease? Because here is the revelation: institutions have always preferred to destroy men not by killing their bodies, but by killing their legacies. They don't erase, they corrupt. They don't silence, they ridicule. And the laughter of a kingdom is often more fatal than a dagger in the dark. John became a parable, a puppet strung up after death, used to terrify others into obedience. And you, whether you see it or not, are surrounded by the same theater. Every downfall you witness is a message. Every humiliation you consume is training. The system doesn't just want to defeat you. It wants to own the way you'll be remembered. By the time John's body cooled, the vultures had already moved in. His corpse was just meat, what mattered was who controlled the story. And make no mistake, the story was never neutral. The church framed his death as divine judgment. The barons painted it as justice. And Rome? Rome saw opportunity. John had already surrendered England to the Pope, declaring himself a vassal of the Holy See. It was an act of desperation, a bargain to keep the barons in check. He handed over the sovereignty of a kingdom so that Rome could grant it back to him like a loan. Imagine that, the most powerful man in England bowing to a foreign altar, begging to keep the crown already on his head. This is how the system works. Power is never destroyed, it is absorbed. John's death wasn't just an ending. It was a transfer. His 9-year-old son, Henry, was crowned under the careful eye of papal guardians, his reign molded like wet clay. The barons bent the knee, the war dissolved, and the system reset itself. Different king, same leash. And this is the forbidden truth: kings are not born, they are manufactured. Institutions shape them, fund them, destroy them, and raise new ones in their place. The church was the banker of legitimacy. Without Rome's blessing, John was nothing. Without the Pope's approval, Henry would have been torn apart before his reign even began. Think about what that means: a crown is not power, it is permission. And permission is granted only to those who serve the machine. The story you were told about John is one of failure, disease, humiliation. But the deeper story is one of continuity. The church proved it could humble a king, strip him of his treasure, poison his memory, and still keep the system intact. The barons proved rebellion was allowed, but only in controlled doses, enough to scare, never enough to break the order. And the people? They were taught that no matter how monstrous their ruler, they were powerless. Their role was to watch, to obey, and to absorb the lesson of humiliation: resist the system, and you will rot like John. And here's where it cuts into your flesh: you are not free of this machinery. You are its descendant. Today it has new names, new faces, new tools, but the structure is identical. Leaders rise, leaders fall, and always the hidden hand remains steady. You've been trained to cheer the fall, not to ask who arranged it. Every humiliation John suffered was a warning to men like you. Not kings, not rulers, but men living under systems too vast to question, too ancient to resist. The church, the barons, the crown, they were only masks. The true machine was control itself. Control through fear. Control through humiliation. Control through the illusion of choice. And centuries later, you are still trapped in the same cage, only now it is invisible. You pay taxes like John's barons, watching your labor siphoned upward. You swallow humiliation at work, in politics, in silence, because you know resistance only paints a target on your back. You live in a world where leaders are raised up and burned alive in the public square of media, not because of truth, but because their destruction keeps you obedient. You are shown downfall after downfall so that you never dare to rise. King John's bowels were not his alone. They are yours. His humiliation is yours. And unless you see it, unless you cut through the lies, you will die the same kind of death, not in filth and fever, but in obedience, wasted, forgotten. That is the true inheritance they gave you. That is the shadow still ruling your bloodline. But you are here because you sense it. Because something in you refuses to be another pawn, another silent subject. You hear these words not as history, but as a mirror. And now I give you a key. A phrase to burn into yourself, a signal that you will not bow, that you will not be erased. Write it below, twice, so it becomes more than words, it becomes identity. The phrase is this: I defy the chains. Type it. Twice. Not for me, for yourself. Because every symbol you cast into the world, every time you declare it, you bend the algorithm of life itself. You break the silence they demand. And in that act, you step into the one truth they fear most, that men who awaken cannot be controlled. John's death was theater. Your life does not have to be. But only if you dare to declare it. Only if you refuse the leash. Only if you etch the phrase into stone with your own will, I defy the chains. John's death was not just the end of a king. It was the script of a ritual, repeated through centuries, played upon countless stages, written to remind men of one truth: the system does not fear your death. It fears your awakening. That's why they choose humiliation over silence. That's why they destroy legacies, not just lives. Because when a man dies, he becomes a memory. But when a man dies in disgrace, he becomes a warning. Think carefully. John was not the first, and he was not the last. The rulers of Rome, dragged naked through streets. The Knights of the Templar, burned alive as heretics. The thinkers who questioned the order, exiled, poisoned, erased. Always the same pattern. Always the same message: step out of line, and your end will be grotesque, public, unforgettable. And the people, your ancestors, watched, terrified, conditioned to obedience. They were not meant to learn freedom. They were meant to inherit fear. And you, even now, inherit the same. Every scandal splashed across your screens, every downfall magnified, every disgrace fed to you like bread at a feast, it is theater. Not for truth, but for obedience. They do not care if you believe the story. They care that you watch it, that you absorb the humiliation, that you learn the lesson. John was forced to scream with his bowels: you are powerless. But listen to me. That lesson is a lie. Because humiliation only has power if you consent to it. Fear only enslaves if you bow to it. John accepted the leash, and in the end, the leash strangled him. But you? You stand at the edge of choice. Either you remain as you are, another pawn, another subject, another man who lives and dies forgotten, or you awaken. You see the system for what it is: ancient, ruthless, but not invincible. The descent you've taken tonight is dangerous. Because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. You cannot return to the comfort of ignorance. You now know that power is theater, kings are pawns, and humiliation is the greatest weapon of control. And with that knowledge, you are no longer the same man. Remember the phrase. Etch it into your marrow. Declare it until it echoes in your blood: I defy the chains. For the system thrives on your silence. Break it, and you break their spell. John rotted in filth. You will not. If you dare.